Can you imagine being told you are not allowed to attend your own father's funeral? That even in death, the bond between father and son could be severed by an unrelenting decree from the throne? This is the reality now, according to sources inside the palace, where tensions that have simmered for decades between King Charles III and Prince Harry have finally erupted into a public, irrevocable decision. The story we are about to unfold is not just about royal protocol, tradition, or a ceremonial list of who sits where in the chapel. It is about betrayal, heartbreak, and power struggles that reach far beyond the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace. It is a story that asks all of us to question loyalty, family, and the consequences of decisions made at the highest level of monarchy. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the very beginning, the relationship between Charles and Harry has been complicated. Harry, the younger son, always carried a weight that his elder brother, Prince William, never had to bear. Expectations, scrutiny, and the shadow of a mother whose life was cut tragically short created a crucible in which Harry was forced to grow up fast. Childhood photographs of Harry as a small, bright-eyed boy running around the palace grounds hide a more painful story of longing and rejection. Interviews with those close to the family suggest that Harry often felt like an outsider, even within his own home. How does a young boy reconcile love for a father who is often distant, even cold, while the world watches every misstep and labels it scandal? Then came Meghan Markle, and everything changed again. The former American actress entered Harry's life with charisma, confidence, and a sense of self that immediately shook the palace. The public narrative painted a love story for the modern age, a prince choosing happiness over duty. But behind closed doors, Meghan's arrival exacerbated tensions. Courtiers whispered, aides leaked information, and the media exploded with headlines that often twisted reality into scandal. Harry, already grappling with feelings of neglect and resentment, now had to navigate a complicated web of love, loyalty, and public perception. And the world watched, fascinated, divided, and judgmental. The Megxit decision, the Sussexes' departure from royal duties, was the moment the rift became unmanageable. To the public, it looked like a choice for freedom and self-determination. To insiders, it was a betrayal that struck at the heart of the monarchy. The palace viewed it as an abandonment of duty and tradition. Charles, long criticized for being distant and reserved, was now perceived as a father who would enforce consequences. The question, then, becomes, can family loyalty survive when public image, duty, and personal pride collide? Can a son ever repair the bond after walking away so publicly and decisively? And now, as the world prepares to mourn King Charles, the unthinkable has happened. Prince Harry has reportedly been banned from attending his father's funeral. No exceptions, no compromises. Sources suggest that this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision, but the culmination of years of careful planning, private memos, and strategic communications designed to protect the monarchy's image while enforcing discipline. The king's decree is final, and the ripple effects are already sending shockwaves through royal circles, social media, and public discourse. What does this ban say about the state of the royal family? About the depth of the rift between father and son? And about the sacrifices demanded of those born into privilege and duty? But to understand why such an extreme measure would be taken, we need to go back further. The seeds of estrangement were planted long before Meghan ever set foot in the palace. Harry's childhood was marked by a complex mix of affection and distance, public expectation and private disappointment. His mother, Princess Diana, had a deeply personal and often strained relationship with Charles. That tension, coupled with the relentless gaze of the public and media, created a perfect storm in which Harry's emotions and choices were scrutinized relentlessly. Are seen as destabilizing forces. The ban from the funeral is a statement, a message, a calculated move that signals the monarchy comes first, and personal grievances, even those as deep as familial love, cannot override the responsibilities of the crown. And yet, the emotional cost of such a decision is immense, raising questions about the true price of royalty and the human cost behind gilded walls. At the same time, this story is not one-sided. Harry is not a passive player in this drama. Reports suggest he has been considering all possible responses, from private negotiations to public statements. His relationship with Meghan and their shared experiences outside the palace have fortified his resolve and sharpened his understanding of media influence. He has the world watching, and he knows that every move will be dissected, judged, and amplified. But what can a son do when the father he loves, despite all the grievances, decides to cut him out entirely? What is left when the final farewell is denied? These questions resonate not just with royal watchers, but with anyone who has experienced family conflict, estrangement, or the sting of exclusion. And let's not forget the wider family. The presence of William, Kate, Anne, and other senior royals adds another layer of tension. Allegiances are tested, loyalties questioned, and whispers abound. Who supports the ban? Who quietly disagrees? Who sees opportunity in the chaos? Every glance, every gesture, every seating arrangement at official events carries weight, symbolism, and meaning. And when the public eventually learns about the funeral arrangements, the fallout will not be contained to the palace walls. The world is watching, the cameras are rolling, and the story is being written in real time. So, why should you care about this story? Because at its core, it is a human story. It's about family, loyalty, heartbreak, and the price of power. It's about decisions made at the intersection of love and duty, tradition and personal freedom. And it's about how even the most privileged among us are not immune to betrayal, rejection, and the harsh realities of life. This is a story that forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How far would you go to protect your legacy? How far would you go to defend your family? And what do you do when the two come into conflict in the most public, unavoidable way imaginable? In the next chapter, we will explore the early roots of the rift between Charles and Harry, the incidents and misunderstandings that set the stage for this unprecedented decision, and the moments that reveal the complex, sometimes painful dynamics of a family that the world has watched for decades. You will meet the people, the incidents, and the subtle betrayals that built the tension to this moment. And just when you think you understand the story, the next revelation will upend everything you thought you knew about this royal feud. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Could a son ever truly feel like a stranger in his own home? For Prince Harry, the answer seems to have been painfully clear long before Meghan Markle arrived on the scene. While the world adored the carefree, mischievous prince racing around palace gardens, laughing and waving at the cameras, the truth behind closed doors was starkly different. Childhood is supposed to be a sanctuary, a time of innocence and warmth. Yet for Harry, it was often a lesson in restraint, disappointment, and longing for approval that never quite came. The dynamics between Charles and Harry were complicated from the beginning. Harry was the second son, and in royal terms, being second carries an invisible weight, one of expectation, duty, and comparison. Prince William, the elder, inherited attention, favor, and responsibility in ways Harry could only observe. He was in his brother's shadow, not just literally, but in every decision, every event, every whispered conversation in the corridors of Kensington Palace. Could a child grow up feeling special when the spotlight always favored another? Harry did. Yet he carried a quiet storm inside, a mix of admiration for his father and simmering resentment for the emotional distance he often felt. The loss of Princess Diana when Harry was just 12 only deepened this rift. Yet behind the smiling camera flashes was a boy yearning for guidance, for approval, for a simple affirmation of love. Could anyone survive that level of public scrutiny at such a young age without it warping their sense of self? Harry did, but the scars of invisibility lingered long into adulthood. Adding fuel to the fire were the complex relationships within the household itself. Staff members, aides, and courtiers sometimes treated Harry differently than William, offering advice, reprimands, or praise in ways that subtly reinforced the sense of hierarchy. Princess Diana, aware of these dynamics, often had to step in to protect Harry, shielding him from the harsher realities of palace life. But even her interventions were limited. She could not change the structural inequalities inherent in monarchy. Harry learned early that he had to navigate a world that demanded obedience, perfection, and emotional resilience, often simultaneously. And there were other, more personal incidents that left lasting impressions. Childhood friends recall Harry confiding in them about moments when he felt unseen or undervalued. Instances as simple as a birthday overlooked, a personal achievement downplayed, or a request for attention ignored all accumulated into a quiet, simmering resentment. The young prince internalized these experiences, building walls of independence, humor, and sometimes defiance. How much of this behavior was rebellion, and how much was a survival mechanism? The line between the two often blurred. Yet Harry also loved his father fiercely, despite the distance. His loyalty, complicated as it was, never completely eroded. There were fleeting moments of connection, secret jokes shared in hallways, private conversations in safe spaces, times when Charles showed tenderness that few outsiders ever witnessed. But these moments were rare, fleeting, and often overshadowed by the weight of duty and expectation. For a boy growing up in a world where every word and action could be scrutinized, these rare glimpses of affection became precious and, paradoxically, more painful because they were inconsistent. The emotional landscape of Harry's youth was also shaped by the glaring absence of normalcy. While peers his age were navigating school, friendships, and adolescent milestones, Harry was negotiating security protocols, public appearances, and media attention. The palace became both home and cage, a gilded structure that offered privilege but demanded compliance. Every decision carried weight. Every misstep became fodder for public discussion. Could a child develop a sense of self under such circumstances without developing defenses, anger, or emotional scars? Harry did his best, yet the emotional cost was profound. Interestingly, some of the most formative moments occurred in moments that seemed trivial to outsiders. A misinterpreted remark by a tutor, a forgotten game invitation, even a casual glance from a parent could reverberate through Harry's psyche. Analysts suggest that these micro-interactions, combined with the macro pressures of monarchy, contributed to a deeply ingrained sense of hypervigilance. Harry learned to anticipate criticism, to prepare for disappointment, to mask vulnerability behind humor and charm. How much of his adult behavior, his outspoken nature, his willingness to break tradition, his eventual departure from royal duties, was rooted in these early experiences? Likely more than anyone outside the palace could imagine. And yet, there was resilience. Harry's experiences forged a unique character, one capable of empathy, loyalty, and fierce love. He formed deep bonds with friends and family who understood his struggles. He developed a sense of justice, a desire to protect those who were vulnerable, and a willingness to confront injustice, even when it involved his own family. But every act of independence, every attempt to carve a separate identity, also heightened the tension between him and the traditional structures he was born into. The stage was set for conflict. By the time Harry reached adolescence, these dynamics were undeniable. Observers note that the patterns of estrangement, emotional distance, and misaligned expectations had solidified. The foundation of the rift between father and son was no longer subtle. It had become structural. Public appearances, family gatherings, and private interactions all reflected a complicated, sometimes contradictory relationship, one in which love, loyalty, and duty constantly collided. Could any reconciliation have occurred without intervention? Perhaps. But in a family and institution where protocol often outweighs personal sentiment, the odds were stacked. Harry's experiences in childhood also shaped how he perceived authority, trust, and family loyalty in adulthood. The distance he felt from Charles, combined with Diana's protective influence, created a dual narrative, a deep reverence for his mother's values and a cautious, sometimes adversarial approach to his father. This duality would later influence decisions that shocked the world: his marriage, his media statements, and ultimately, his departure from royal duties. Every move carried echoes of the past, every choice informed by decades of emotional experiences. As we examine this early estrangement, one must ask, could King Charles have done things differently? Could small acts of attention, consistency, or emotional availability have changed the trajectory of their relationship? Or were the pressures of monarchy, tradition, and public life simply too powerful for personal bonds to survive unscathed? The questions linger, and the answers are murky. What is clear, however, is that the foundation of conflict was firmly established long before any public disputes, before Meghan's arrival, before Megxit. The stage was set. The emotional undercurrents, the subtle betrayals, and the unspoken resentments had been brewing for decades. Harry's feelings of being overlooked, undervalued, and sometimes unseen had created a complex web of emotions that would influence every subsequent choice he made. And the consequences of those choices are now unfolding in real time, with the latest revelation being the ultimate ban from his father's funeral. But the story does not end with childhood grievances. The arrival of Meghan Markle would act as both catalyst and accelerant, intensifying the unresolved tensions and forcing Harry to confront the limitations of family loyalty, duty, and personal freedom. What happened next, when love, media scrutiny, and palace politics collided, would escalate the rift into a full-blown family crisis. And the fallout from those events is where the real drama begins, a drama that would culminate in a decision that no one saw coming. Could one person truly change the course of a prince's life and the trajectory of a monarchy? For Prince Harry, that person was Meghan Markle. From the very first moment their worlds collided, nothing would ever be the same. The arrival of Meghan into Harry's life didn't just mark the beginning of a new romance. It acted as a catalyst, igniting long-smoldering tensions, challenging centuries of royal tradition, and forcing the young prince to confront the choices he had been avoiding for decades. But before the media frenzy and public spectacle, there were intimate, behind-the-scenes moments that shaped a story far more complex than tabloids could ever capture. It began innocuously, with mutual introductions orchestrated by friends and mutual acquaintances in the entertainment and social spheres. Meghan, a rising actress with a penchant for social causes, exuded confidence, intelligence, and charisma. Harry, already carrying the emotional weight of childhood estrangement and public scrutiny, was immediately drawn to her authenticity, a quality he had long found lacking within the structured, protocol-driven environment of his family. Could it have been love at first sight? Perhaps, but it was also fascination, curiosity, and a spark of hope that life outside the palace might hold freedom, understanding, and unconditional acceptance. Yet this initial connection did not unfold in a vacuum. From the very first moment Meghan's name became associated with Harry, palace aides, courtiers, and even family members began scrutinizing her every action. The British press, historically relentless with any royal romance, quickly intensified their coverage, analyzing her career, past relationships, and social media presence. Headlines ranged from celebratory to outright disparaging, painting a picture of a princess-to-be who was both captivating and controversial. How much of this was genuine concern for Harry's well-being, and how much was a reflection of entrenched classism, suspicion, or fear of change within the monarchy? For Harry, navigating this environment was both exhilarating and exhausting. Meghan represented more than love. She symbolized choice, autonomy, and a potential escape from a life of preordained obligations. Yet the challenges were immediate and relentless. There were whispers in the corridors, pointed remarks at formal events, and subtle yet persistent attempts to test her compatibility with royal expectations. How does a family, bound by centuries of tradition, reconcile its rigid protocols with a union that represents modernity, independence, and defiance of convention? The answer, it seems, was through tension, resistance, and quiet sabotage. The public's perception of Meghan only added layers to the complexity. To many, she was a modern fairy tale figure, an independent woman entering the halls of royalty with grace, wit, and determination. To others, she was an interloper, a disruptor, someone who threatened the carefully curated image of the royal family. Social media exploded with polarized opinions, creating a climate where every action, smile, or misstep was magnified, dissected, and debated worldwide. Did Meghan anticipate this level of scrutiny? Perhaps, but even she could not have fully prepared for the magnitude of public judgment that awaited her. Inside the palace, the emotional stakes were even higher. Charles, already navigating his own complicated relationship with Harry, now had to contend with a figure who challenged his authority, his expectations, and the traditions he had long sought to uphold. His advisors reportedly debated strategies, weighing the need to maintain public favor against the desire to enforce family discipline. Every decision carried risk. Allowing Meghan to integrate fully could be seen as modernizing the monarchy, while resistance could escalate tensions and create public scandal. What Charles chose in those critical months would set the stage for events that, years later, would culminate in the funeral ban. Meanwhile, Harry's inner conflict deepened. He was torn between loyalty to his family and his love for Meghan. He understood the pressures of tradition, the weight of duty, and the expectations placed upon him from birth. Yet he also recognized a truth that had become undeniable. His father, for all his power and position, could not provide the emotional connection he sought. Meghan offered an alternative vision of life, one where choice mattered, where personal fulfillment was not sacrificed at the altar of obligation. But embracing this alternative would require confronting long-standing familial resentments, public scrutiny, and institutional resistance. The courtship itself was not without challenges. The media, ever vigilant, reported every detail, magnifying minor disagreements, personal opinions, and even innocuous behaviors into potential scandals. Staff within the palace were divided, some supportive of Meghan, others skeptical or outright hostile. Harry found himself navigating a minefield of expectations, loyalties, and hidden agendas. Every dinner, every meeting, every family gathering became a negotiation of values, beliefs, and allegiance. Could a young couple truly thrive in such an environment? Many doubted it, yet Harry and Meghan persisted, driven by a connection that transcended protocol, rumor, and public opinion. Even within the family, reactions were mixed. William, reportedly protective of both the monarchy and his brother, expressed concerns about how Meghan's influence might affect Harry's decisions. Other senior royals reportedly issued private warnings, emphasizing the potential pitfalls of marrying outside the traditional expectations of the institution. These warnings, while framed as guidance, often carried undertones of disapproval or skepticism. Did Harry perceive these as protective measures or as interference? It is likely a combination of both, a mix of familial concern and institutional caution that further complicated an already tense dynamic. As the engagement became official, public scrutiny intensified. Every photograph, public statement, and gesture was analyzed for hidden meaning. Meghan was alternately lauded for her poise and criticized for perceived impertinence. Harry, for his part, was caught between defending his partner and adhering to the expectations of his role. This tension, according to insiders, was palpable, shaping decisions, conversations, and interactions that would echo for years. The palace, meanwhile, grappled with the delicate balance of supporting a union that was both personal and public, private and performative. But perhaps the most consequential aspect of Meghan's arrival was the way it amplified pre-existing fissures within the family. The estrangement between Charles and Harry, already deep and complex, was now intensified. Minor disagreements over protocol, security, and public appearances escalated into arguments with lasting emotional impact. The sense of urgency that accompanies a high-profile marriage added pressure, forcing decisions and reactions that might have been avoided under calmer circumstances. Every meeting, every phone call, and every public appearance became a battleground of loyalty, perception, and control. The narrative that emerged publicly, one of a prince finding love and happiness, masked a much more complex reality. Behind closed doors, emotional stakes were high, tensions simmered, and long-standing grievances resurfaced. Harry's loyalty to his father was tested daily against his commitment to Meghan, and the institution itself became an active participant in the drama. Could a relationship survive in such a crucible? History shows that even minor missteps in the royal family can become global scandals. Yet Harry and Meghan persisted, setting in motion a chain of events that would culminate in decisions, betrayals, and ultimatums that no one saw coming. And the public? They were watching, often unknowingly shaping the trajectory of this story. Social media, tabloids, and international press coverage created a feedback loop of perception, rumor, and influence. Every statement or action was scrutinized, every gesture interpreted as symbolic. The pressure was immense. Could a couple navigate such scrutiny without fracturing? Harry and Meghan would find that, even with love as a guide, the pressures of legacy, tradition, and expectation were nearly impossible to reconcile with personal autonomy. The arrival of Meghan Markle, therefore, was not just the start of a romantic chapter. It was the spark that ignited years of conflict. It exposed vulnerabilities, intensified emotional rifts, and forced confrontations with the realities of family, duty, and personal identity. The decisions made during this period, both by Harry and the royal family, would echo through every subsequent event. The departures, the media battles, and ultimately, the unprecedented ban from a father's funeral. Yet the story was far from over. The initial challenges of love, tradition, and scrutiny were only the beginning. What followed were events that would escalate tensions beyond anything previously imagined. Choices were made, alliances formed and broken, and the stakes rose higher with each passing year. The question remained, could Harry and Meghan survive the pressures of the institution, the public, and their own pasts? And what would the consequences be for a son who dared to defy expectations, for a father determined to protect his legacy, and for the monarchy caught in the crossfire? But what came next would test every bond, reveal every secret, and set the stage for a confrontation that would leave the world stunned, and no one saw it coming. What happens when love, duty, and ambition collide in a world that watches your every move? For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the answer was a seismic rupture, Megxit. When Harry and Meghan announced they would step back from royal duties, the world gasped. Headlines screamed betrayal, loyalty, and unprecedented scandal. But behind the carefully worded statements and polished photographs lay a story of tension, defiance, and emotional turmoil that would reshape the monarchy forever. The announcement itself was surgical in its timing and wording. To the public, it was a statement of choice, a modern couple seeking independence, freedom, and privacy. But to those within palace walls, it was a shockwave, a defiance of centuries-old tradition, and a direct challenge to authority. The language of the statement, "Step back from senior royal duties," seemed simple, neutral even, yet it carried enormous weight. To Charles, it was more than just a personal decision by his son. It was a public affront, a rejection of the responsibilities Harry had inherited at birth. Megxit was not merely a media moment. It was a personal earthquake. The palace, which had always managed transitions with meticulous control, found itself on unstable ground. Advisors scrambled, courtiers whispered in hallways, and senior family members weighed the consequences for years to come. The monarchy operates on perception as much as protocol. Every gesture, every word, every decision is scrutinized, interpreted, and often weaponized. Harry's departure threatened not only familial bonds, but also the institution itself. Could a monarchy survive a public, very human dispute within its ranks without appearing fractured? This question loomed over every meeting, memo, and conversation in the following months. For Harry and Meghan, the decision to step back was both personal and strategic. Years of feeling unseen, unheard, and misunderstood culminated in a choice that was as liberating as it was dangerous. They sought autonomy, financial independence, and the freedom to define their lives on their own terms. But independence came at a price. Their every move would be analyzed, criticized, and sensationalized. Could one couple maintain dignity and privacy while challenging an institution built on centuries of tradition? Could they navigate a world where love and loyalty are often incompatible with public duty? The media reaction was immediate and brutal. Headlines from every corner of the globe speculated about motives, alliances, and the impact on the monarchy. Some framed the move as an act of bravery, a modern fairy tale of autonomy and self-determination. Others labeled it betrayal, narcissism, or selfishness. Social media, with its instant amplification, became a battlefield of public opinion. Millions debated the couple's decision, dissecting every word, gesture, and photograph. The intensity of scrutiny created a feedback loop. The more attention they received, the more extreme the reactions became. How could any human relationship survive under such relentless observation? Inside the palace, tensions escalated. Charles reportedly viewed the decision as a personal affront, a rejection not just of tradition but of his authority. Advisors debated options: negotiation, intervention, or strict enforcement. The question was no longer theoretical. It was practical, immediate, and fraught with consequence. How would the monarchy maintain unity and credibility while handling a rebellion from within? Every conversation was steeped in history, emotion, and strategy. Harry's choice challenged decades of precedent, forcing the institution to confront the limits of tolerance and the costs of defiance. The emotional stakes for Harry were immense. He was caught between a desire to honor family and a need to protect himself and Meghan. Public expectation demanded obedience and decorum, yet his own well-being required boundaries and autonomy. Every interaction with his father, siblings, and senior advisors became a negotiation, fraught with tension and unspoken resentments. Could a son reconcile love for his father with a need to break free from a life that had often felt confining, suffocating, and emotionally distant? Harry had to navigate these pressures while remaining in the public eye, a task that few could imagine enduring without fracture. And then there was Meghan. Her role in Megxit has been debated endlessly, scrutinized from every angle. Some critics claimed she pushed Harry to rebel. Others suggested she was a supportive partner, helping him assert control over his own life. The truth likely lies somewhere in the gray space between these extremes. What is undeniable is that her presence catalyzed decisions that might have remained dormant otherwise. She represented choice, agency, and a departure from expectation, qualities that both inspired and threatened those entrenched in tradition. The fallout extended far beyond the palace. Media outlets published every possible angle, from financial implications to potential impacts on the line of succession. Political figures, international commentators, and celebrity voices weighed in, further amplifying the drama. Harry and Meghan's decision became a mirror reflecting societal debates about duty, autonomy, and the role of tradition in modern life. Could the monarchy survive in a world where personal choice is increasingly prioritized over inherited responsibility? The answer, at that moment, seemed uncertain. Yet, even as the world reacted, internal palace dynamics were becoming more complex. Supporters of Harry and Meghan within the family quietly sought to mediate, offering guidance, reassurance, and attempts at negotiation. Detractors, however, warned of precedent, scandal, and the erosion of authority. Every meeting, phone call, and private conversation carried enormous weight. Small gestures could signal alliance or betrayal. Every word could be misinterpreted. The stakes were high, not just for Harry and Meghan, but for the legacy of Charles, the unity of the family, and the perception of the monarchy itself. Financial independence became another critical flashpoint. As part of their exit strategy, Harry and Meghan sought to establish a life outside the direct support of the crown. The move created debate and tension over funding, security, and resource allocation. Advisors questioned whether the couple's plans would undermine the monarchy's financial integrity or provoke public criticism. At the same time, Harry and Meghan were determined to chart a new path, one in which they could control their narrative and provide for themselves without relying on inherited privilege. Could financial autonomy coexist with royal duty, or was it inherently a threat to the institution? Throughout this period, Harry's public image evolved dramatically. He moved from the carefree wild prince of tabloids to a figure of sympathy, resilience, and eventual controversy. His every decision, statement, and public appearance was analyzed for hints about his relationship with his father, the monarchy, and Meghan. The world watched, fascinated by the tension, the drama, and the unfolding narrative. Harry became both a symbol of rebellion and a human being navigating impossible pressures. Could the public ever truly understand the complexity of his choices? Or would he forever be trapped between expectation and reality, perception and truth? Amidst this turmoil, the seeds for the eventual funeral ban were being sown. Charles, observing years of defiance, public commentary, and institutional challenges, began to consider measures that would assert authority and control. The ban was not yet public, but the decision-making process had begun in earnest. Advisors, correspondence, and private meetings all hinted at a growing determination to enforce consequences for perceived breaches of duty. Every act by Harry and Meghan, no matter how personal, was now intertwined with questions of loyalty, legacy, and the preservation of royal authority. The psychological impact on Harry was profound. He faced an impossible dilemma: loyalty to his father versus loyalty to his own life and family. Every decision carried risk, every action carried consequence. The emotional stakes were high, and the stress immense. Could a son truly break free from a system built to bind him? Could love for a partner outweigh decades of familial expectation and public duty? For Harry, these questions were not theoretical, they were life-defining. Even as the public debated and the palace maneuvered, the personal cost was undeniable. Friends and confidants noted a profound emotional strain, moments of vulnerability, and the constant pressure of living under a microscope. Harry's choices, though courageous, came with heartbreak, isolation, and the realization that reconciliation with his father might never occur. And yet, even in these moments, he remained committed to forging a path defined by autonomy, love, and personal integrity. And as Megxit unfolded in real time, the consequences rippled outward. Media coverage intensified, palace relationships strained, and public opinion polarized. Harry and Meghan became lightning rods for discussion, admiration, and criticism. But within this whirlwind, one truth emerged clearly. The rift between father and son had grown to a scale that would have been unimaginable years earlier. The decision to step back was no longer just about autonomy. It was about survival, identity, and the right to define one's life on one's own terms. Yet, even as the world reacted, an even more dramatic and personal confrontation loomed: the eventual funeral ban. The steps that led to that unprecedented decision were being quietly orchestrated behind palace walls. The emotional stakes, the political calculations, and the family dynamics were converging in a way that would ultimately shock both the monarchy and the world. How does a father reconcile love with authority? How does a son confront exclusion from the one person he has long sought to please? And what consequences arise when those questions collide in the most public of arenas? What drives a father to make decisions that could forever alter the relationship with his own child? For King Charles III, the answer lies in a calculated mix of duty, legacy, and personal pride. While the public saw the headlines, the carefully curated photographs, and the polished statements from Buckingham Palace, the reality behind the throne was far more intricate and far more deliberate. The eventual ban of Prince Harry from his funeral did not emerge overnight. It was the result of a strategy crafted over years, shaped by perceived betrayals, calculated risks, and the unyielding pressure to preserve the monarchy. It began with the quiet observations Charles made of Harry's choices. From stepping back from royal duties to the high-profile interviews and media appearances, every action by the younger prince was catalogued, analyzed, and assessed. Advisors relayed information about public perception, potential risks to the institution, and the impact on the royal family's cohesion. Every move by Harry was interpreted not just as a personal decision, but as a potential threat to centuries of tradition. And while some observers suggested that Charles could have reacted with patience or empathy, the reality is that the crown leaves little room for uncertainty. Every perceived misstep could have ramifications far beyond the palace walls. Behind closed doors, Charles consulted with advisors, lawyers, and senior family members, mapping out possible courses of action. It wasn't simply about enforcing discipline. It was about sending a message to Harry, to the public, and to the monarchy itself. Sources suggest that private memos circulated detailing scenarios in which Harry's behavior could be constrained, controlled, or countered without igniting a public backlash. But as the years passed, the calculus shifted. Temporary measures were no longer sufficient. The situation demanded a more permanent solution, one that would assert authority, preserve legacy, and, according to insiders, restore a sense of order to the family dynamic. Charles's strategy was subtle, multi-layered, and deeply rooted in both tradition and political calculation. First, there was the containment of public appearances. By limiting Harry's access to official events and carefully curating what was reported to the press, the palace aimed to minimize opportunities for public embarrassment or scandal. Second, advisors were tasked with monitoring communications, public statements, and interviews to anticipate potential conflicts before they arose. Third, contingency plans were developed in case Harry's actions escalated or were perceived as undermining the monarchy. These measures were all part of a broader strategy that emphasized control, reputation management, and the preservation of authority. Yet strategy alone was insufficient. The emotional component, the bond between father and son, complicated every decision. Charles, according to insiders, was torn between paternal instincts and royal responsibility. On one hand, he reportedly wished for reconciliation, for moments of connection that might repair decades of estrangement. On the other hand, the weight of the crown demanded decisiveness, authority, and a firm stance. The tension between love and duty, between personal desire and institutional expectation, is a theme that has haunted monarchs for centuries. In this case, it would culminate in one of the most dramatic, publicly consequential decisions in recent royal history. Communication was key. Charles's team carefully controlled the flow of information, both to Harry and to the public. Leaked memos, strategic statements, and subtle cues were employed to signal expectations and consequences. But these signals were not always clear to Harry, leaving room for misunderstanding, frustration, and heightened tension. In some instances, the communication strategy appears to have backfired, intensifying the rift rather than calming it. Could a different approach, more transparency, more empathy, have prevented the escalation? Perhaps, but by the time decisions hardened, the momentum toward confrontation had become unstoppable. Charles also leveraged his closest allies within the family and the institution. Trusted advisors, senior royals, and even external experts were consulted to assess risk, predict outcomes, and plan contingencies. Every choice was weighed for its potential impact on public perception, internal cohesion, and long-term legacy. The monarchy is not merely a family. It is an institution, and the preservation of that institution often takes precedence over personal feelings. Charles's hidden strategy reflected a deep understanding of both human nature and institutional imperatives, a dual focus that would shape the eventual decision to exclude Harry from his funeral. Timing was another crucial element. Advisors reportedly emphasized the importance of acting decisively, choosing moments when the consequences could be both enforceable and symbolically powerful. By selecting strategic junctures for confrontation or communication, Charles ensured that his actions would carry maximum weight, both emotionally and institutionally. Every interaction, every public appearance, and every private conversation was part of a carefully choreographed sequence designed to establish authority, signal consequences, and reinforce the boundaries of royal expectation. Yet, strategy alone cannot account for the emotional impact of such decisions. Charles, despite his careful planning, was reportedly affected by the personal cost. Private sources describe moments of introspection, doubt, and even regret, fleeting but meaningful glimpses of the emotional burden carried by a father who must balance love with duty. Every step taken to protect the monarchy also risked further alienating the son he reportedly loved. How does a parent reconcile the need for discipline with the desire for connection? How does a king enforce rules without shattering hearts? These questions haunted Charles even as he implemented measures that would ultimately define the family's trajectory. The hidden strategy also included subtle public messaging. Every speech, ceremonial appearance, and media statement was crafted to reinforce the narrative of stability, duty, and continuity. At the same time, careful discretion ensured that the internal conflicts remained largely invisible to the public. But controlling the narrative in a world of relentless scrutiny is never simple. Every leak, every rumor, every unintended interpretation could unravel even the most meticulous plan. Yet Charles and his team navigated these challenges with a precision that combined political acumen, institutional knowledge, and emotional calculation. One of the most consequential aspects of Charles's approach was the incremental escalation of consequences. Rather than confronting Harry with a single, overwhelming directive, the strategy involved layered measures, limits on participation, subtle restrictions on influence, and carefully monitored interactions. Each step was designed to communicate expectation and assert control while providing the son with opportunities to reconcile, or at least understand the gravity of his actions. Yet, by the time the funeral decision emerged, these incremental measures had proven insufficient. The rift had deepened to a point where only a decisive, symbolic action could assert authority and preserve institutional integrity. Financial oversight and public perception were also integral to Charles's hidden strategy. Every move by Harry and Meghan, from media deals to philanthropic initiatives, was analyzed for potential impact on the monarchy's image and operations. Advisors provided detailed risk assessments, weighing the benefits of autonomy against the potential for scandal. Every statement, every contract, every public appearance was scrutinized for alignment with royal expectations. Could the monarchy tolerate complete independence without risking credibility? The answer was increasingly no. setting the stage for measures that would extend beyond career and reputation into deeply personal territory. In many ways, Charles's hidden strategy was as much about psychological preparation as it was about procedural enforcement. By signaling consequences, restricting access, and maintaining close monitoring, he sought to influence Harry's decisions without overt confrontation. Yet this subtle orchestration carried inherent risks: misinterpretation, resentment, and emotional backlash. How do you enforce authority when the one affected may perceive every action as a personal attack? How do you balance the need for control with the unpredictable nature of human emotion? For Charles, these questions were constant, unrelenting, and ultimately decisive. The culmination of this strategy, the funeral ban, was therefore not an isolated action but the endpoint of years of calculation. It represented the intersection of duty, legacy, and emotion, a symbolic assertion of authority that also carried profound personal consequences. Every advisor consulted, every memo circulated, every subtle signal sent over the years converged at this moment. What may appear to the public as a sudden, shocking decision was in reality the result of meticulous planning, careful observation, and deeply considered calculation. And yet, even with the strategy fully in place, the personal ramifications were enormous. Charles, aware of the emotional devastation such a ban would cause, reportedly struggled privately with the decision. Could he maintain the balance between father and king? Could he enforce institutional boundaries without crushing familial bonds? These questions would linger, even as the action itself was carried out with resolute authority. The tension between public duty and private love, the central theme of this hidden strategy, would define the narrative that the world would eventually witness. The hidden strategy also relied on timing, secrecy, and information control. Advisors meticulously planned the moments when Harry would be informed, when the public would learn of the decision, and how the news would be framed. Yet beneath the polished veneer, the planning for King Charles's funeral has become something entirely different. A war zone of egos, loyalties, and decades of unresolved conflict. The palace, for all its glittering reputation, has transformed into a strategic arena where every decision carries emotional, political, and personal consequences. From the very moment the decision to begin planning the funeral was made, advisors understood that it would not merely be a logistical exercise. Seating arrangements alone could spark controversy, symbolizing alliances and betrayals, preference and exclusion. Every guest list was debated in private chambers, every invitation scrutinized for both protocol and message. In normal circumstances, a funeral is a time of mourning, a space for reflection. But in the context of Charles's reign and Harry's estrangement, the funeral was an inevitable flashpoint. The question wasn't simply who would attend, it was who would be allowed, in what capacity, and under what scrutiny. Could tradition coexist with decades of personal tension? The answer was proving elusive. Security considerations added another layer of complexity. With Harry and Meghan's high-profile status, every potential scenario had to be analyzed, from media intrusion to public demonstrations. Advisors argued over protective measures, potential escape routes, and controlled visibility. Yet these logistical details were inextricably linked with family dynamics. Allowing Harry to attend could spark media frenzy, reignite old conflicts, and potentially overshadow the solemnity of the occasion. Excluding him, conversely, risked public backlash, criticism of Charles's character, and the perception of a fractured monarchy. Every decision was a knife's edge, balancing safety, optics, and emotion. Inside the palace, tensions among family members were palpable. William, Catherine, Anne, and other senior royals each had their own perspectives, interests, and loyalties. Some advocated for inclusion, citing the importance of family unity and reconciliation. Others favored exclusion, emphasizing duty, authority, and the need to reinforce the consequences of past actions. The debates were intense, filled with subtle jabs, long silences, and quiet machinations. Every whispered comment in the corridors, every private phone call, carried weight and consequence. Could Charles navigate these competing interests without further inflaming conflict? That question loomed large, as every choice had implications for both the funeral and the broader family dynamic. The ceremonial elements themselves became battlegrounds. Which roles would Harry be allowed, or denied? Could he participate in readings, processions, or moments of public acknowledgement? Each task or exclusion was symbolic, communicating messages both to the public and to family members. Advisors meticulously assessed what gestures would signify inclusion, respect, or discipline. Seating charts were drafted and redrafted, each version scrutinized for subtle cues of favoritism, slight, or acknowledgement. In the palace, symbolism is currency, and every move could be interpreted in multiple ways. The challenge was not only logistical, but deeply psychological. The emotional tension within Harry was intense. Reports suggest that he was monitoring every development, aware that each decision reflected both his relationship with his father and the ongoing public narrative. Every invitation sent, or withheld, was analyzed for underlying meaning. Did Charles's team intend to send a message of authority, or was it a final test of loyalty? Could Harry navigate a situation where love, duty, and expectation were in direct conflict? His inner turmoil, compounded by years of estrangement and public scrutiny, created an almost unbearable pressure, one that would ultimately shape his response to the ban itself. Meanwhile, the advisors operated under immense pressure. Royal funerals are highly scripted events under normal circumstances, but this was far from normal. Each detail was analyzed for its public resonance, its internal message, and its symbolic impact. From the music selected to the order of processions, every element had to balance tradition with contemporary sensitivities. And lurking behind it all was the tension between Charles's desire to assert authority and the unpredictable behavior of a son who had defied expectations repeatedly. How do you maintain ceremonial dignity when personal relationships are fractured beyond repair? The palace was discovering just how difficult that could be. The media, as ever, amplified every rumor, speculation, and leaked detail. Tabloids dissected seating arrangements, wardrobe choices, and minor gestures, turning them into narratives of inclusion, exclusion, and hidden meaning. Social media commentators speculated endlessly, amplifying every perceived slight or symbolic action. Charles's team reportedly monitored these responses closely, adjusting plans as needed to mitigate potential backlash while still enforcing boundaries. But even the most meticulous planning could not control the velocity or unpredictability of public opinion. Emotional spikes were inevitable. Sources within the palace described private moments of tension that ran the gamut from whispered arguments to outright confrontations. Staff members reported overhearing heated discussions about who should sit where, how processions should be conducted, and what messages each action would convey. Every small decision, who opens a door, who lays a wreath, who speaks first, was loaded with symbolic power. For those directly involved, the stakes were profoundly personal. For those observing, the implications extended to perceptions of loyalty, justice, and authority. The challenge was further complicated by the need to maintain continuity with royal tradition. Funerals are as much about legacy as they are about mourning. Protocols dictate the order of service, the roles of family members, and even the placement of objects and symbols. Advisors needed to ensure that, despite personal grievances, the ceremony reflected the dignity and continuity of the monarchy. At the same time, these very protocols highlighted divisions, as every rule became a potential instrument of inclusion or exclusion. Could the funeral be both ceremonial and strategic? Could grief and politics coexist in a single event? The palace was navigating these impossible questions with caution, calculation, and occasional tension-fueled drama. Private communications played a critical role. Advisors and family members exchanged confidential messages, emails, and notes, discussing contingencies and possible reactions. These communications reveal the painstaking detail with which the funeral was planned, as well as the emotional calculus underlying each decision. The ultimate goal, according to sources, was to maintain order, enforce authority, and send a clear message about expectations, all while managing the fragile emotional landscape of a family strained by decades of conflict. Harry, meanwhile, remained an unpredictable element. Even as the palace executed its meticulous plans, the younger prince's potential responses loomed over every decision. Could he attend discreetly? Could he react publicly in ways that would undermine the ceremony? Could his presence or absence shift public perception in unforeseen ways? Every scenario was evaluated, yet uncertainty remained. The tension between authority and autonomy, between father and son, created a charged atmosphere, one in which even minor incidents could escalate into public scandal. Financial and logistical considerations further heightened the stakes. Security, transportation, media management, and ceremonial protocols were all intertwined, and each required meticulous attention. The advisors were tasked with ensuring that the funeral would proceed flawlessly, regardless of personal dynamics. But the presence, or exclusion, of Harry had implications beyond ceremony. It affected security detail, media coverage, and public perception, each element amplifying the potential for controversy. What happens when the carefully guarded walls of a palace are pierced by the sharp edges of secrecy? For King Charles and Prince Harry, the leaks of private communications became a turning point, a moment where strategy collided with exposure, and the hidden dynamics of the family were laid bare for the world to dissect. These weren't ordinary messages. They were memos, emails, and letters that revealed the meticulous planning, unspoken ultimatums, and simmering resentments that had shaped the royal household for years. And when the leaks surfaced, the consequences were immediate, dramatic, and irreversible. The first wave of leaks was subtle, an offhand remark here, a misinterpreted memo there. But over time, they became undeniable. Journalists reported on private letters sent between Charles and advisors, revealing not only the king's plans for controlling Harry's public engagements, but also his deep frustration with his son's choices. These documents painted a picture of a father balancing love with authority, strategy with emotion, and duty with personal feelings. Yet the leaks also showed vulnerability, glimpses of a man torn between enforcing consequences and preserving familial bonds. Could any parent be expected to reconcile these conflicting pressures? Charles tried, but the public now held the magnifying glass. The most significant leaks involved communications between Charles and senior advisors discussing Harry's behavior, his media engagements, and the steps being considered to limit his influence within the monarchy. Phrases like must reinforce boundaries, maintain institutional integrity, and Harry's independence cannot undermine the crown leaked to the press. For the public, these words seemed cold and calculating, a stark contrast to the image of a family united by love. For Harry, who had long sought approval, these leaks were another blow, proof that his father's approach prioritized institution over intimacy. Could the monarchy survive under such scrutiny without appearing ruthless? The answer would soon become painfully clear. Inside Buckingham Palace, the leaks caused panic and frustration. Advisors scrambled to identify the sources, tighten security, and prevent further dissemination. But in a world where information travels at the speed of light, containment was nearly impossible. Every new revelation prompted speculation, rumor, and analysis across media outlets worldwide. The palace was suddenly forced to operate in a heightened state of alert, balancing the ceremonial demands of a king's funeral with the reputational damage caused by the leaks. Each day brought new challenges, new questions, and new pressures. Could a family withstand this level of intrusion without cracking under the strain? Harry's reaction to the leaks was complex and multifaceted. Privately, he reportedly felt betrayed, angered, and deeply hurt. Publicly, he maintained composure, carefully crafting statements and appearances to avoid escalation. Yet behind closed doors, the leaks validated some of his suspicions, that his relationship with his father was deeply entwined with strategy, calculation, and legacy rather than unconditional love. The emotional impact was profound. How do you reconcile the desire for connection with the realization that even private communications are instruments of control? For Harry, the answer was neither simple nor comforting. The leaks also had strategic implications. By exposing the king's plans, they forced Charles and his advisors to adjust their approach. Communications, invitations, seating arrangements, and ceremonial roles had to be reconsidered in light of public knowledge. Every step forward required recalibration, a delicate balance between maintaining authority and managing perception. Could the funeral planning survive this level of exposure without further escalating tensions? Advisors worked tirelessly, knowing that even a minor misstep could ignite media firestorms and public debate. One particularly explosive leak involved a draft memo suggesting limitations on Harry's participation in public ceremonies related to the funeral. The document outlined potential restrictions, roles he could or could not perform, and contingency plans in case he acted outside the prescribed boundaries. While intended as an internal planning tool, the leak transformed it into a public scandal. Media outlets interpreted the memo as evidence of a father punishing his son, while analysts speculated about the broader implications for family dynamics and public perception. Could Charles enforce authority without alienating both the family and the public? The tension was almost unbearable. The leak also revealed the depth of planning behind the eventual funeral ban. It showed that decisions were not impulsive but the result of years of careful observation, risk assessment, and strategic maneuvering. Advisors had considered every scenario: potential public backlash, Harry's responses, security concerns, and media interpretation. The level of detail was staggering. Every contingency was mapped, every potential consequence analyzed, every move designed to achieve maximum effect while preserving the monarchy's dignity. And yet, even with meticulous planning, the leaks ensured that not everything could remain under control. Public reaction to the leaks was immediate and intense. Social media exploded with speculation, criticism, and empathy. Supporters of Harry framed the leaks as proof of a cold, calculated father who prioritized duty over love. Critics argued that Harry had brought these challenges upon himself, challenging the institution and defying tradition. International coverage amplified the story, creating a global conversation about loyalty, family, and the price of power. How could the monarchy respond when private strategies were now public controversies? The answer required a careful, deliberate, and emotionally charged approach. The emotional stakes were amplified by the contrast between the leaks and public appearances. On camera, Charles appeared composed, dignified, and in control. Behind closed doors, however, the communications revealed frustration, doubt, and a meticulous desire to assert authority. The gap between public image and private reality created a tension that was palpable, both for the family and for observers worldwide. Could a father manage grief, strategy, and public expectation simultaneously? Charles had to, even as the personal cost grew with each revelation. Harry, meanwhile, faced the added challenge of interpreting these leaks. Every word, phrase, and suggestion was scrutinized for hidden meaning. Advisors who spoke with him privately reported that he felt a mix of validation, betrayal, and sorrow. He understood that the leaks confirmed the depth of his father's strategic thinking, but also highlighted the emotional distance that had existed for decades. Could he reconcile the father he loved with the king who planned consequences? This emotional dissonance became a defining feature of his response to subsequent events. The leaks also intensified discussions within the palace.